Just when you thought tensions couldn't get higher, they did. Prime Minister Netanyahu unleashes a precision strike deep inside Qatar, targeting Hamas leadership at the source and stunning the world. President Trump voices sharp disapproval of the strike's location, but declares that Hamas must be destroyed. As Israel enters what could be the final and most dangerous phase of its Gaza operation, this is a make-or-break moment. And on the anniversary of 9/11, we're reminded the war on terror is far from over. This is Israel Undiplomatic.
Shalom and welcome to another episode of Israel Undiplomatic. I'm Mark Regev and I'm here as per usual with my co-host Ruthie Bloom. How are we today, Ruthie?
Oh, well, hi, Mark. Actually, I'm feeling really good about the operation that Israel conducted yesterday. We're taping this on Wednesday. Yesterday afternoon, we all discovered that the Israeli Air Force targeted the group of Hamas leaders who've been holed up in a fancy hotel in Qatar. They're also the so-called negotiators of the hostage deal. And these are the same guys who on October 7th, were in this VIP lounge of that hotel, praising Allah for the rapes, beheadings, mass murders that had taken place in southern Israel by the Hamas invasion. Not only that, but there was an actual television screen in that room, and they were pointing to it so happily, watching all these poor innocent kids running from the Nova Festival, etc. And then they all bent down and prayed, thank the Lord for this massacre.
So that's exactly right. The people who Israel has targeted, and let's be frank, we don't know if we got them all. The jury's out. Sometimes it takes days, if not longer, to find out exactly who was hit and how badly and so forth. Not all of these strikes succeed. We hope they do. We hope this one does. But the jury, as I say, is still out on who was actually killed. But these people deserve to die. These people deserve to die. They were the leadership of Hamas. They were the leadership behind the October 7th massacre of Israelis. They were the leadership that not only was involved in preparing for the massacre, but the leadership that when the massacre happened, and we all saw these terrible, as you said, horrific videos of violence that was gratuitous. The Nazis did terrible things, but they always tried to hide it. Yes, there's even a famous speech by Himmler, the head of the SS, who says, we're killing all these Jews. It's very important, but we can never talk about it. Yes. And Stalin did terrible things, but if you talked about it, they'd accuse you of being a capitalist parasite. They hid their crimes. Here, most of the footage, or much of the footage about the atrocities of October 7th was actually put out by Hamas. They were proud of what they were doing. And these guys in Doha were proud, and they were celebrating the beheadings and the rapes and the burnings alive and the taking of civilians hostage. All this they were celebrating, and so they deserve to die. And I think we can make a comparison between the Israeli strike and tomorrow is the anniversary of 9/11. Today is
we are now on the 10th
of September,
and
the 11th is tomorrow. Thank you for correcting me. Always with numbers. You do better than me. I remember 10 years after that atrocious attack, the Obama administration, and they deserve praise for it, took out Osama bin Laden at some hideout he had in some rural area in Pakistan. Now, America and Pakistan had been allies throughout the Cold War. There was a special relationship between Pakistan and the United States. But the minute Pakistan was harboring Osama bin Laden and other killers who were guilty of these jihadi, horrific terrorist attacks against New York and Washington, and there was the plane, of course, that went down somewhere in Pennsylvania, they were a legitimate target. And I'd say to voices in America who criticize Israel, they say, you're not at war with Qatar, you shouldn't have struck there. It's exactly like what the United States did in Pakistan. You had an enemy there. The local government in Pakistan was either turning a blind eye or didn't want to take it on or whatever. And America did the right thing. And you sent in special forces to take out bin Laden and his cohorts. And I think Israel is following the same doctrine, or it's been a long-standing Israeli doctrine. There can be no immunity for terrorists who are involved in the murder and the massacre and the other atrocities against innocent civilians. There cannot be immunity. And if they're in Qatar, just as Osama bin Laden was in Pakistan, if the Hamas leadership is in Qatar, we will find them and we will eliminate them.
And it's an interesting point you're making, because I have to say, I don't know, a few hours after the following day after the October 7th massacre, first of all, Prime Minister Netanyahu said, we will hunt you down wherever you are, and we're going to change the face of the Middle East. So both of those things are coming true, even though several people doubted him. And the reason they doubted him, I mean, other than the people who hated him and they doubt whatever he says, right? But even people who supported him doubted it because we had just suffered this incredible tragedy that Israelis are used to having good security, and we missed the ball on this one. And so to get up after that atrocious massacre and say, we're going to change the face of the Middle East and we're going to hunt down all the perpetrators, many of us said, yeah, we'll believe it when we see it. First, let's protect our civilians before you think you're going to go out. Now, some people say that this war, because it's going on 2 years now, that it is Israel's longest war. That's true. But what they don't realize is that everything that's been accomplished, 2 years is actually a small amount of time given what's going on in the Middle East. And I would like to discuss with you right now what you were talking about Qatar. First of all, we didn't target any Qatari leaders, but we need to talk now about President Trump's response to what happened, behind the scenes conversations that we don't know about, but we can guess about, and why in the world we have been putting up with Qatar as some kind of mediator when it funds and supports Hamas.
So, first of all, you say, the war's been going on for 2 years and this only happened now. And a lot of people say, why now? So I'd remind everyone, as I said a moment ago, it took almost a decade for the United States to bring justice to Osama bin Laden after 9/11. And people need to remember that. And if it took us a while to get the Hamas leadership in Qatar for all sorts of reasons, okay, but justice is done. This goes back to Golda Meir, Israel's famous female prime minister. There was the terrible massacre of the Israeli athletes of the 1972 Olympic Games. And following that, she gave instructions to the Israeli intelligence services, it's been widely reported, that they have to take out all those terrorists involved in that massacre. And it took years. But we did succeed in eliminating all those people involved in butchering our athletes at the 1972 Olympics. So there's a long-standing Israeli policy there. And I think it's actually very healthy that Israel's enemies will know that if you're involved in planning, in killing terrorist attacks against Israelis, you will be found and you will pay a price.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you something interesting about that. This is part of defense. Just because you go out and hunt doesn't mean that you're not doing this on behalf of your defense. Now, note that this week, President Trump announced that he is going back to the old days when the Defense Department in the United States, before the Cold War, was called the War Department. And he's reinstating the name the War Department. And I think that's appropriate. Because war is part of your defense. That doesn't mean that you are aggressive. It means that part of your defense has to be the willingness to be aggressive when it's appropriate. Now, in Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu said something, and I think it's so true. He said, all these people say Israel has the right to defend itself. Of course, until it exercises that right. And then condemnations pour in. So let's get to then, from this to how President Trump responded to this, and keeping in mind that up until yesterday, President Trump has been only supportive of Israel. He also has said, he said 2 days ago or something, Hamas, this is your last warning, and I mean it. This is it. You get the hostages back and the war, all that, although on Israel's conditions, not Hamas's. And he said, this is your last warning. And he also has been a staunch supporter and ally of Israel and the West and against global jihad. So, but let's analyze what he said in the immediate aftermath of the Qatar strike.
So he said, and he could say something more in the next day or two, but up until now, the White House has disassociated itself from the strike, saying they had nothing to do with it. And they've sort of said, well, Hamas are legitimate targets, but Qatar is a sovereign country, and maybe Israel shouldn't have done it. Okay. And I think I understand why they're saying this. They have relationships across the Gulf, and maybe sometimes they think now they need to distance themselves a bit from Israel for their own geostrategic reasons. Of course, across the Arab world, they're saying that Israel could never have done this without a green light from the United States, because there's that huge American base in Qatar. One of the reasons why Trump is so concerned about his relationship with Qatar. You'll also remember he was there recently, right? When he did the trip in the Arab world, he went to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE. It's one of the countries he visited. It's the country that wanted, I don't know what happened with the plane that was donated for Air Force One from the Qataris. I mean, the Qataris have got a lot of money and they share it out and they buy influence and so forth. But Qatar is an important, from Washington's perspective, it's an important American partner. So that the fact that they would distance themselves from the operation, I understand the politics behind that. I think Netanyahu helped them to distance themselves when he said very publicly, this is our operation. Our operation, he almost said our operation alone, yes? We take full responsibility by ourselves for the operation. There was this talk that Israel didn't ask for America's permission, but we notified them, we updated them that we're about to attack. But it's unclear to me, was this done 2 minutes before, 2 hours before, 2 days before? You don't know what, obviously America's a friend and an ally. America has assets in Qatar. America has assets in the region. I think Israel probably did the right thing in notifying them, but you don't ask though. You don't ask permission. This is a core issue for Israel, right? These killers were in Qatar. And I'd remind the Americans, also going back to a previous administration, this time the administration of George W. Bush, not Obama, who took out Osama bin Laden, but America, with massive bipartisan support inside the United States and massive global support, went into Afghanistan to take down the Taliban regime because the Taliban was harboring terrorists, those responsible, those guilty for 9/11. What did Israel do in Qatar? We didn't target the regime like the West did after 9/11. We said we're not attacking the regime, even though they're harboring the Hamas people. It's a fact. Everyone sees the Hamas people in Qatar walking around. They are harbored by Qatar. According to the same logic that America applied after 9/11, and the attacks of October 2023 were Israel's 9/11. Yes, when we attacked Qatar. Well, we attacked in Qatar, but we didn't attack Qatar. It was a surgical strike. We said publicly, no Qataris were our targets. We wanted to hit the terrorists in Qatar. You could even argue that Israel's response to 2023 was actually more moderate and more surgical than America's response, because once again, America said, we're taking down the Taliban. We're taking down the Taliban regime because they are hosting Al-Qaeda. We've never said that about Qatar. We could, but we've never said we're taking down the Qatar regime because they're hosting these Hamas murderers.
No, that's right. But here's the thing. President Trump was even more, I would say, his words were harsher than you're making them out to be, which is why some Israelis are nervous. Because he did say, I'm disappointed. Also, his spokesperson, Caroline Levitt, used those words. He's very disappointed, and he promised Qatar that this won't happen again, and this isn't in Israel's and America's interest. However, yes, Hamas has to be eliminated. And he used even stronger language the next day. He's been saying things that make us nervous. But here's the thing. You're absolutely right. He's got to appease I don't think he should have to appease Qatar, but that's another question. That's America's business. Okay. And I think that one of our problems is in Israel, it's a little hard for us to criticize that when we also have been dealing with Qatar. And we've also taken money from Qatar, as has America, American universities, Europe. Qatar, as you said, it spreads around its money. And we also enabled Qatari money to go into Gaza for years. So that because under this false conception, the conceptia we call it, that if you give them money, then they won't, I don't know, then the people won't be hungry and miserable, and then they won't commit terrorism, which is complete nonsense. And we know that. We learned that the hard way many times over, not just on October 7th. So that's the thing. It's a little hard when we've been sending delegations to Qatar to negotiate the hostage release rather than just saying, and why isn't the United States saying to the Qataris, you tell those Hamas leaders to go over to Gaza and pull out the hostages from those tunnels if they have to do it by themselves. But no, so there's a lot of stuff going on here that is very disturbing about the whole way this has been arranged. And that brings us to the discussion of the hostage negotiations, because Netanyahu, we have to look at this as a series of events that happened. Netanyahu accepted Steve Witkoff's latest proposal for a ceasefire hostage release, though this time his terms were more on Israel's side, not Hamas's. Hamas rejected it. Then again, and we were weeks. And meanwhile, Hamas was releasing videos of starving hostages, etc. And this is while we're getting millions of trucks of humanitarian aid into Gaza, etc. And then this week, what happened? 2 events happened that were like, okay, this is the last straw. And one was this targeting of Israeli soldiers in Gaza. 4 of them were killed. And the following day, a terrorist attack on a bus in Jerusalem. 6 people were killed, many, many more wounded. And Netanyahu, according to what he said, and then I gave the order. I made sure that with the security services, we all discussed this. And I said, they had been planning it and discussing it prior to this. But he said, okay, now's the time. And apparently it was also the time because there was a big meeting of these leaders in Qatar. So just as we have targeted Hezbollah leaders, we've been doing this for the last 2 years, waiting for the right opportunity to get them all in one room, and it's been brilliant. And by the way, the naysayers who say, why didn't we do this earlier, and why are we doing it this way? You have to remember, we have not only been fighting Hamas in Gaza, trying not to kill civilians, trying not to kill the hostages. We took out Iran's nuclear, not all of it. We severely weakened Iran. We almost totally destroyed Hezbollah. We are taking on the Houthis. I mean, anybody who criticizes this as going too slowly or how come we didn't then and why aren't we doing it now? He is actually changing the face of the Middle East, and that's the fact.
So you talked about the criticism in Washington. And once again, the Americans, for their own reasons, want to move away from this, to disassociate themselves from this. And as you said, the president has said publicly he's unhappy about this Israeli action. Once again, we've spoken why we think he's saying that. Why he feels the need to do that. But we've also been condemned across the Arab world, even countries that theoretically have good relations with Israel. Across Europe, we've been condemned for this. And nothing new. I mean, the Europeans and the Arab countries are always condemning us since the war started, since we started fighting back. Yes. But if one wants, I talked before about the Bush administration, I talked about Obama. When we took out Saddam Hussein's nuclear reactor in 1981, we were also condemned by everyone, including by Reagan's administration in Washington. And there was a UN Security Council resolution that passed condemning Israel because the United States supported that resolution. We're both old enough to remember all this. 20 years later, everyone agrees that Israel did the right thing. And all these people talk about fighting proliferation and the nuclear weapons. The spread of Israel's done more to stop the spread of nuclear weapons to dangerous regimes than any other country in the world. Iraq, 1981, Syria in 2007, and now with this year's strikes on Iran. And I say this as condemnation today, and I think in the long term people will say Israel's done the right thing. We've shown terrorists who massacre civilians, who think they have immunity because they're being hosted by a sovereign state and therefore they're protected. No, we will find you and you will pay a price. In Netanyahu's words, he said something that at least it spoke to me. He talked about, the Hamas murderers aren't the first anti-Semitic extremists who've tried to kill Jews and succeeded in killing Jews. We had the terrible years of the Second World War and the Holocaust. What's the difference today is then that we were stateless and defenseless and homeless. Today, since the reestablishment of the Jewish state, we are sovereign, we are independent, and thank goodness we are strong and we can defend ourselves. And if you come across our border, you give orders to people to come across our border and massacre our people, we will find you and we will eliminate you. Justice will be done. And this is something when Jews were being slaughtered in the Holocaust, we had to beg others to protect us. Now, thank goodness, we can defend ourselves.
Yes, well, that's one of the reasons that October 7th was so traumatic, because you said we can defend ourselves. And suddenly we felt so vulnerable. Everybody did in Israel. Whatever your political positions were, it's really irrelevant. That vulnerability was something we hadn't experienced. We'd experienced many wars, terrorism, rockets, knifing, stoning, name it, war and actual wars. This was something where we suddenly felt that deep down security of having our own army and having our great security services. They failed us. It felt like we'd all failed ourselves. And it was very, that was the worst part about it, was the sense that maybe we really aren't protecting ourselves. And since then, though, we've restored faith in our abilities. Now, however, we've got to talk about what this means. Of course, the protest movement in Israel right away said, now this is a death sentence for the remaining hostages in Gaza. Or they said, what did you need this for? You could have done this after we rescued the hostages, and why didn't, and now, Hamas won't make deals with us. It's absolute nonsense, by the way, because Hamas didn't want to release all the hostages anyway and would not have. But here's one optimistic note I would say, and of course I don't have any inside information on this, but this is my theory about it, that actually we have a better chance now of rescuing those hostages or having the Hamas captors who are actually holding them, all right? Because, these leaders are in Qatar and five-star hotels, etc. But the guys on the ground, first of all, most of the leadership of Hamas in Gaza is also destroyed. So you have lower level commanders. And it is possible that we conveyed this message that you're not safe wherever you are. And it also, by the way, Iran's supreme leader, Khamenei, went right down to his bunker when this happened. And that's including if we didn't kill all the people we were targeting, the Hamas leaders. Even if we didn't, this is a great message. Remember, you can't get away with this. The same thing with the beeper operation with Hezbollah and with the killing of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran when he went to the funeral of the president. So why I'm saying this is the guys actually holding the hostages in Gaza City, which is where we assume they are, which is why we haven't completely eradicated Gaza City right now. We are evacuating the civilian population and we are also bombing buildings that have been evacuated, but we're being really careful about the hostages. Here's what I believe. I believe that those guys holding the hostages, if they're scared enough and if they got that message, maybe what they'll do is say, okay, there's nobody negotiating for us here, and we have no commanders left. They'll want to make their own deals with Israel and America to be spared, to have their lives spared, and to be exiled somewhere, to be sent off somewhere to Europe or whatever in exchange for the hostages. And so we might actually have moved closer to this. And even Trump, even after he said, I'm disappointed and it's not good, he said, but this may be an opportunity for peace. He said that. And that's why I think you always have to listen to everything he says, because why would he say it's an opportunity for peace? I think it's because of what I just said.
So, I don't know. I've been listening to the criticism in the international media, and one of the criticisms, of course, is that these are the people we've got to make a deal with, and we've eliminated them, and now there's no one to make a deal with. Well, first of all, it's not clear we eliminated them all. Unfortunately, I wish we had, yes. But secondly, the idea that these people maybe were negotiators and therefore they were interested in an agreement. If they were interested in an agreement, they wouldn't have said no to Witkoff 2 months ago, and they wouldn't have said no to President Trump this week, right? Who put something on the table, we accepted it, and they rejected it. There's what you're saying. Does this give, if this operation is successful and we've taken out most of the leadership in Doha, does that give local commanders in Gaza more say? And therefore, is there a higher chance? I don't know. I'm sure some of the local leaders in Gaza, it's possible it could be true. Maybe others are kamikazes that don't give a hoot about things like that, right? And so, they just want to die for their cause, their crazy jihadist cause, of course. But I spoke about Reagan in 1981. I'd like to speak about Reagan in 1985, where after a terrorist attack against American troops in Germany, he struck at Libya, either because the terrorists were supported by Libya or because the Libyan government was involved in this attack on American soldiers. And at the time, widely condemned. What's Reagan doing? He's being a cowboy. He thinks he's in a Western. He's shooting from the hip, right? Everyone, wall-to-wall condemnation except for America's closest allies. In the end, it worked. Libya got out of the terrorist business. They stopped targeting Americans because they saw that America says, you attack us, we will attack you and you will pay a price. And so despite all the condemnation and all the language, in the end, it worked. And maybe this will be the case now. Maybe that Hamas leadership that survives, whether in Doha or in Gaza, will understand that as long as this continues, their death is closer every day. And maybe that will convince them to do a deal. And the government of Israel, we've heard the prime minister say more than once, to get hostages out, he's willing to give immunity. Not for free, but he says they can leave Gaza, we'll let them leave, we'll wave them goodbye, so to speak, yes? And I'm sure the same applies. If a leadership outside Gaza orchestrated a deal, I think it's possible they could get immunity. And with that on the table, that's going out probably through intelligence services, maybe through Witkoff and the Americans, the idea if there's talk of a deal. But like that 85 strike by Reagan, sometimes you need violence for the other side to get a message. They thought they were safe in Doha. They thought they were immune in Doha. They thought they were living in their 5-star hotels and they don't give a hoot about what's going on in Gaza, right? They can keep on doing what they were doing, which is not good. Not good for Palestinians, not good for Israelis, not good for everyone. Maybe this attack is like a huge, like in 1985, slap across the face, which will be a reality jolt for these people. And maybe that'll help us get the hostages out.
Well, I certainly hope so. But one thing is clear. Whether it happens real time or in retrospect, like you said, afterwards the world cheered or didn't cheer, but accepted that something was necessary. Victory is what does that. I mean, victory of the good guys over the bad guys. Victory of bad guys is never good, all right? Victory cheers people up. It's not just that it's important for all Judeo-Christian values against Islamofascism, but it cheers people up when you see, listen, every time when Israel won the Six-Day War, the world was in awe. When Israel committed the Entebbe raid and rescued the hostages. The world was in awe. The beeper operation. I mean, I'm jumping all over dates here, but the fact is, when you pull off something so amazing, people actually respect you. The people on your side are relieved because you're eliminating threats against them as well. But the others are also in awe. That's a fact. And that's why it's even more important than ever. And you mentioned the Taliban, and we saw the disastrous way that the Biden administration, what it did, absconding and leaving the Taliban in power. That's one thing. And one other thing I'd like to say that people forget, you know, when the Iraq war was launched, there were a lot of people saying, oh, you're doing this, the neocons, warmongers on behalf of Israel. I would like to remind everybody that even then, Israel said Iran should be the target, not Iraq. That has been a consistent position. And look what we've done. And so I would say, first of all, we have good reason today to celebrate that, even if the operation wasn't a total, even if we didn't eliminate every single one of those leaders. But now I think it's really important because we're talking about this is all part of global jihad. These are not isolated incidents. What happened, everywhere in the world, we're talking about global jihad in this sense. And that is why we need to talk now about the 24th anniversary of 9/11. We have to talk about it because it is, as we mentioned before, that is this week. We're marking that anniversary. And I think it's especially relevant under these circumstances because either we're going to defeat, when I say we, of course I mean Israel, but I mean America. And I mean at the moment, many countries in the West, their leaders have just sided with the enemy, their own enemies. They don't even realize it. So I don't even like to say Israel and the West. Okay, I'm going to leave that off for a minute. Israel and America. 9/11 is a perfect opportunity. I mean, the anniversary, a perfect opportunity to say, look, those Twin Towers, when the planes went into the Twin Towers and the passengers on that flight over Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, down to the plane so that it wouldn't hit the White House and the Capitol building. That was 24 years ago. We're still fighting that war. Good people. I mean, and I'm not even talking about, I'm saying the people who understand that you cannot sit back and let that stuff fester because it doesn't go away. And I think Israel right now in the last 2 years has done more in that arena than anybody else, and than in all these years put together.
And if one talks about Islamist extremism, whether it's Hamas or Hezbollah or the Houthis, one has to remember the big player here, which is Iran, which is a country that's been taken over by these extremists. That's not like Hamas and Hezbollah are terrorist organizations who control land, yes? Or in Hezbollah's case, who used to control land. In Hamas' case, controlling less and less land. But in Iran, the regime there, our country has been taken over by that sort of extremism, and it's very dangerous. And preventing them from the marriage between that radical ideology and weapons of mass destruction, that's the real threat. And I think what we did earlier this year in the 14-day war was very, very important, because we don't want to see that sort of radical ideology that was responsible for 9/11 or October 7th in Israel. We don't want to see them have weapons of mass destruction. But I want to finish, because we're running out of a time here. I want to say just the following. If you hear a lot of the commentary about what Israel just did in Qatar, Israelis shooting from the hip, they're being irresponsible, this is bad for peace. On the contrary, I think I've said it before on our program. No one makes peace with weak people. Israel strong, Israel showing that it's willing to take on its enemies, Israel winning, that makes Israel a sought-after partner for cooperation in the Middle East. And I dare to say that even those Arab countries who are condemning us, they're thinking other things privately. They are thinking the Israelis are serious, they look after their interests, they are neighbors who have the same enemies as us, these extreme Hamas, these extreme Iranians, and so forth and so on, I think you will see this point as another point where the Arab world looks at Israel and says, better to have Israel on our side, and that'll be good for peace.
Absolutely. So I'm looking forward to seeing by next week what has unfolded.
And I look forward to meeting you again here in this studio and continuing our discussion.